will I be able to see Tom or no? No.
No, you
okay.
won't,
but I'll hear.
I just sent him the link, so you won't hear him. He just might ask questions and stuff, and we'll figure it out. So you can still say hi to him on camera. Yeah, and I will check to make sure my phone is silent.
Oh, yeah.
I forget that. So you all might want to check. All right, and we might still have some folks rolling in here in person, but unless I think we can go ahead and start having begun. Yep. Okay, great. So for those of you in person, we are also
Hi, Jeff.
Hey, everybody on Zoom. Hello in person. We have folks joining us online. So we'll just go ahead and get started. I just want to say welcome. If you're just getting here, we've got coffee and pastries for those of you in person in the back. Feel free to enjoy those. That is courtesy Roast and Toast here in Petoskey, Michigan, one of our sponsors for this event. Our other sponsors for our Coffee at 10 series are Charlevoix County Community Foundation. And obviously our members make these programs possible as well. So just a big thank you to our sponsors for making Coffee at 10 possible. This summer, we've done a series of presentations that are in connection with the exhibition we see right here called true pleasure to showcase this work featuring his series on honky tonk music. And to complement the series, what we have done is sought out some other Michigan and regionally based music photographers to talk about their own work. So that leads me to today's event. Our special guest is Doug Coombe, all the way up from Ann Arbor. Doug has been working throughout Ann Arbor and Detroit for 20 years.
Professionally 20, but shooting for 30 almost.
Yeah, all right. And you still work for the Detroit Metro Times.
Yes.
And your work has been featured in Rolling Stone, Spin, Billboard, Enemy, Mojo, Wax Poetics. I think you go into Wire, Sub Pop Records, Ghostly Records, and in Michigan Radio. So it's a real treat for us to have you here. And we look forward to just hearing about your work, how you got started, and see some of these amazing images. So please join me in welcoming Doug.
Thank you, Liz. It's an honor. It's an honor to be here in the midst of some amazing Henry Horenstein photos. It's also nice. Liz's brother Tom is joining us virtually. He's one of my favorite music writers, so I'm really glad he's here. My journey into photography was I was a longtime record store clerk, just a big old record nerd. And one day somebody came in and asked me how many shows I'd been to. And since I'd worked at record stores, I got into tons of free shows. And it was then that I actually realized I went to a lot of shows and maybe I should just start taking a camera. And then the final impetus that kind of pushed me over the edge, where also too, my stepfather was a really good photographer. He had a dark room. He never taught me, but I learned a lot through him by osmosis. Anyways, I was very much into indie rock. And then when Fugazi put out this record, this photographer, Adam Cohen, this photo changed my life because looking at this, I just felt like this broke all the rules. And this was something I wanted to do. I mean, that's Guy's shoe is in the middle of the camera and it's just kind of capturing a lot of action. And I wanted to do that. So fortunately for me, my sister had just married, not this gentleman, this is David Yao, who's the singer of the Jesus Lizard, but my sister had married the drummer for the Jesus Lizard, which were a very kind of crazy grunge alternative band. So my school was a mosh pit, and I think the thing that I really learned doing this was, you didn't really have time to sit there and compose photos and like, oh, I'm gonna try this. I mean, you basically just had to protect your camera, try to grab a shot because he was frequently leaping over you or people were landing on you. So to me, the whole idea was just kind of capturing energy. And so with that, in '93, I bought my first film camera, and having gone to U of M and my mom having asked only one thing, to take some history of art classes, which I took a bunch of, I was really into Italian futurists. So I bought a camera where you could do multiple exposures on a single frame of film. And this is a band that I really loved very dearly, the Laughing Hyenas. We'll be seeing some photos of the Laughing Hyenas. This is Larissa Strickland, who passed away, I think 2006, if I'm recalling. But she was a real kind of indie rock woman pioneer. She was a fierce guitar player, incredibly loud, but also had been an art student at Parsons and kind of just helped the Hyenas with their posters and graphic design and aesthetic. So early on, I was doing photos for just friends' bands and managed to get photos on a couple different album covers, Big Chief and Outrageous Cherry. And then once I did that, I realized I should study photography because I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. So I did go to Washtenaw Community College. And then I did get to photograph the band Fugazi, who had inspired me to start photographing. So I was mostly just kind of photographing a lot of indie rock bands. This is a band, Brainiac. There's a very excellent documentary on them. I forget which streaming platform. They had toured with the Jesus Lizard. And I feel like my journey in photography also parallels a bunch of other different just changes in the landscape we all live in. So one was, I did start out shooting film and was I felt like, my work dialed in for shooting with film. This is Elliott Smith at St. Andrews Hall. Billy Corgan, Smashing Pumpkins, when Siamese Dream came out. I think what's funny about this too, for those of you who might be aware of Sub Pop, this is a similar kind of look, but I was more into touch and go records and wasn't really aware of, this is just kind of a classic. You pop a shutter or pop a flash and then leave the shutter open to kind of get all that motion. But again, this was just me trying to be all like clever art school and Italian futurist kind of capturing energy. Mario and Melvin Van Peebles. Well, all right, so I'm photographing a lot of indie rock, but also I'm still very shy photographing people. And I happened to walk into the Metro Times the one day, their staff photographer, Bruce Giffen, who was a real hero of mine, had quit. And I feel like another parallel journey or kind of change in the culture was, this was still the era of print journalism, pre-Craigslist. So Metro Times was incredibly fat. Lots of personal ads. That's a whole other funny story. But I basically walked in the day he quit and Summer Guide was coming out and they're like, do you want to shoot 6 assignments? And I was like, sure. So I just walked out, but then I was like, what have I just done? Because I was like, I was just too shy to be like, can I take your picture? So at that point, I was going to just have to get over my shyness. And I feel this was 1999. So Detroit was very different back then. Downtown was pretty empty. There has always been an amazing, vibrant art scene in Detroit, and the music scene, which I will talk about too. My timing was really brilliant because there was a bunch of music revolutions that were about to go on in Detroit right around this time. But this is Melvin and Mario Van Peebles, because Sweet Sweet Badass had his kind of classic blaxploitation film had premiered in Detroit. This is actually now a posh hotel right now, but it doesn't look like a posh hotel. But then part of the reason too is to give credit where credit was due was working at a record store. I had to hook up at a film lab. A friend of mine worked at the film lab and I gave him deals on records and I got free processing. So shooting film was very expensive. Every time you push a shutter, that's $1. But I had a hookup so I could afford to shoot film. And again, this is the Laughing Hyenas a little later on from the previous picture. And again, this is just a coffee house. And what's funny is this is Zoot's, which was a legendary coffee house where a lot of indie rock bands played, but it was pretty dead. And this is around the corner from Third Man Records. This is like a block from where Third Man Records is. But, back then it was really pretty sparsely populated. I remember too back then, you could just park anywhere. I think a few years after this, I actually got a parking ticket and I was actually kind of excited because I was like, wow, they're giving out parking tickets. I think, part of me documenting music is just my love of music too. But I think part of it too was, just growing up with my stepfather being a photographer and having all these great photo books around I really loved the whole idea of capturing history. And part of me, I mean, again, they're not playing, you know, I don't know if there's 50 people at the show, I'd be surprised, but to me, they're important and they meant a lot. And I think much like the work too of Henry Horenstein, where obviously this is a passion project, he loves this music and the musicians, you just want to document it. Well, for me, they were a brilliant band and they inspired me, but another band that they inspired is Nirvana. So they recorded all their records with Butch Vig. Nirvana, when they were recording Nevermind, wanted to work with Butch because they loved the sounds that the Laughing Hyenas got. They loved the sound of their records. So, you know, it's funny because I'm also a music writer, and I wrote a cover story on the for the Metro Times about the Laughing Hyenas and just kind of their story. And the upper left corner is John Brennan, who, for me, if there's one thing I could achieve with my music writing photography, he deserves to be in the same pantheon as Iggy Pop, as the MC5. He's just one of the greatest rock and roll vocalists alive. He just is such a powerful singer. He never loses his voice. He's an incredible, powerful singer. And I usually lose my voice at every show of his just because I'm trying to talk over his roar. He's just, and the funny thing too is he's very fierce and intimidating on stage, but off stage he's a pussycat and a sweetheart. I'm gonna come back to that. So John, before Laughing Hyenas, and I'm gonna circle back to this, was in one of the, so Laughing Hyenas was very important. You know, also Sonic Youth was very inspired by them. You know, inspired Nevermind, which is arguably, you know, the greatest, or the most influential indie record of the 90s for sure. Prior to that, he was in a band called Negative Approach, which was one of the great hardcore bands. So this would have been very early 80s. And this is the band today. They still tour. But anyways, I was an indie rock nerd, but then my first paying gigs actually prior to the Metro Times was shooting techno, Detroit techno. And what was fun about this was, I mean, to be honest, at the time, I really didn't care for techno at all. And I didn't know a thing about it. But Detroit, you know, a lot of my photography too is just a love letter to the city of Detroit in southeastern Michigan. It's one of the greatest music scenes in the world. It has an amazing history. It has an amazing present. It always just keeps evolving. I mean, I'm never worried that, you know, like the scene's going to die off, because it always, I mean, there's legends. This is Jeff Mills, one of the great originators of Detroit techno. But it always just managed. So there's veterans like Jeff Mills who kind of mentor kind of the new generation. And yeah, there's just always new talent coming up. But again, this is a film shot, multiple exposure on a single frame of film. So I just started photographing a lot of techno because these were my first paying gigs. And to me, the beauty of being a music photographer is seeing live music. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people who I really don't know much about them, but just seeing them live, like suddenly I get it. I've kind of become a huge fan. This is Richie Hawton, originally from Windsor, Detroit's sister Canadian city, who is another great Detroit techno originator. So, you know, the one thing I was gonna say is, so part of my journey though too is about the evolution of film to digital. And so then the hard thing was my connection at the photo lab. He stopped working there, and having to pay for my own processing was just something I couldn't afford. So I was an early digital adopter in 2002. And I know we would all do things differently if you could go back in time. If I could go back in time, I would probably try to shoot film for a few more years, because these early digital cameras were awful. My second digital camera, well, third, I guess technically, was the Nikon D2X. It was $5,000. My iPhone would do a better job now. So they had a lot of problems with them. One was the flashes tended not to work well or blow out. I mean, I kind of reined it in, but I think this is Niagara from Destroy All Monsters and Ron Ashton from the Stooges. But like, it would just blow out highlights in her shirt and stuff like that. And this is the Von Bondi's. I mean, again, and I've been, you know, going through like a lot of artists, my archives during the pandemic. And I kind of look at this and I'm just like, this looks awful. And people are like, no, it like looks like the time, it looks sweet. And I'm like, no, it looks like a really bad early digital camera. Like, I don't, like, oh, people will want to emulate that. I'm like, why? This just looks awful. Like, so for me, it is frustrating because I think, you know, these are important people, cool shots, but I'm just like, it would have been easier to do a better job with film. Also, the autofocus on a lot of these wasn't really that reliable, which is weird because that wasn't new. Like autofocus was something that came from film cameras. Kind of bouncing back to film, but during the pandemic, one thing I got to think, I was going through my archives a lot and doing some writing, and one thing that, and having music, you know, live music photography taken away from me, I really ended up thinking a lot about the power of music to create communities, to inspire individuals, to change people's lives. So, I mean, music clearly changed my life, but also to change the world. So in 2000, in Detroit, there were 4 little music revolutions that went on that I think if you're in the middle of it, there weren't that many people, you know, so I think there was a sense it was great music, but I think nobody kind of imagined at that point in time that it would change the world. I mean, because you go back to the Laughing Hyenas. I mean, again, they were kind of a cult band, you know, they didn't have a lot of fans. I mean, they had a few, but they sure weren't selling a lot of records. So and again, to go back to the power, and again, I really just recommend seeing live music in small venues. It's just one of the most rewarding things in the world. It's also, I feel like if you see a band at a live venue for the price you'd pay to see somebody for the price you would pay for parking at a major arena, like you can go in, buy a beer, maybe even buy one of their records, and that would like barely cover parking to see somebody at Little Caesars Arena or something like that. So anyways, for the Metro Times, they started this thing in '99 called The Blowout. And again, talking about cultural changes, this is pre-internet. So you don't have Spotify, you don't have Facebook. And there were all these kind of amazing bands that I think weren't all aware of one another. I mean, and the Metro Times was really good at covering music, but I think to bring all these people, all these bands together for a 3-day music festival in Hamtramck, which is this amazing little enclave city within Detroit that had been largely Polish community, but has evolved to become like a Muslim, there's also like Banglatown. It's a very diverse neighborhood, but there's also all these little bars that kind of throw back to the kind of auto factory days and just kind of blue collar bars. So there's a number of small bars all within walking distance, which really was brilliant for this festival. And what was brilliant about it too, because one of the challenges of Detroit is it's such a massive city. It's like 138 square miles. I think to try to do a similar festival within Detroit would be hard because everything is just really spread out. So anyways, at the Blowout in '99, I had no idea who this band was. They were called The Go. And I just walked in and their guitarist was Jack White. And when I would shoot the Blowout, I would like hit at least 20 venues a night. So I'm just running in and out and parking my car and driving through alleys. He was in the middle of a solo when I walked in and I was just like, my God, like who is this guy? Like, I mean, it just sounded phenomenal, but it was also just this really quick shredding solo that just sounded amazing. And then it just stopped because they were just very tight rock and roll songs. And his sound reminded me a lot of Ron Asheton. What's funny is this wound up in the first Go album on Sub Pop, but Jack was out of the band by the time this album came out, so he got cropped out of the photo in the album. But I ended up seeing The Go. This was at the Gold Dollar, which was just a legendary small venue that is now burned down. And again, they were just phenomenal. I mean, again, if there were maybe 100 people there, but again, this is just like the whole idea of music creating community, because I mean, everybody, I feel, you know, it's all the stories you hear about CBGBs, you know, in New York in the 70s, but like everybody in there was like an artist, a photographer, a musician. And I think like everybody that was in the room at this show has gone on to just do such amazing things. Well, anyways, seeing the Go, I was like, I should probably go check out this band called the White Stripes. And what was funny about this show is Jack is wearing a wedding ring. They had actually just split up before this show, Jack and Meg, and the show almost didn't happen. I mean, the White Stripes almost ended. And there was actually, I feel really bad because it's a funny name, but in their place, Ben Blackwell, Dave Buick, and somebody else were going to play, but at the last minute, Meg agreed to play. And again, this is, just talking about community to, of just musicians and artists that kind of all go on to change the world in a way. I mean, I love this because there's a better shot of it, but that's Brendan Benson right there. In one shot, he's kind of looking adoringly at him. This is John from the Go. This is Co, who plays bass in the Dirt Bombs and has a radio show on Little Steven's Garage. Willie Wilson, who books the Magic Bag. And again, this was just like a small little group of fans and friends. This is Jack playing at the Gold Dollar, again, to probably 75 people. But I loved, even then, even though it was a small show, I mean, he's already got the color scheme down. They brought a flag in, So another revolution that happened around then too is Eminem. And again, this shot cracks me up for a number of reasons. One, I still have a scar from taking this photo. This was before his Interscope album came out. And I mean, there's famous stories of like Eminem would play at Alvin's and like be handing out cassettes of his work and people would just kind of throw it away and not care. So Eminem is playing at a rave. This is with proof. This is like in his coffee table book, but security at this rave was being done by Hell's Angels. So obviously nobody there had heard of Altamont, apparently. And again, I did have this background of being used to shooting, the Jesus Lizard and crazy shows and mosh pits, but I also know, they can be dangerous. So even before he was famous, Marshall kind of had this magnetism to him. And there was like a small barricade behind me, but women just wanted to like touch Marshall. I mean, he just had this magnetism, and slowly, like after a half hour, the barricade's getting pushed forward. I'm getting pressed against it, but also like the women don't even care I'm there. I'm just getting like boobs smashed into my head. I mean, they're just reaching around me like, Marshall. After a half hour, I realized I'm gonna get trampled if I don't get out of here. So I got up on stage, just carrying my camera equipment, and someone inadvertently knocked me off the dark stage. I protected my camera equipment. Like any good photographer, got an amazing scar, but it was amazing. I felt like for me, this is like the closest I'm ever gonna come to like experiencing Beatlemania or something like that. So one revolution we have is garage rock, Eminem. The other one is, again, I was photographing techno, so the first Detroit Electronic Music Festival happens. And again, that's a decent crowd there, but I look back at these pictures and the crowds are much bigger there. Back then, Detroit techno was definitely more underground in America, huge overseas back then. But again, it was a very small local crowd, but a lot of the attendees at the first festivals were from overseas. And if you had told me back then when I was photographing this, like electronic music would be hugely popular, like with teens all over America, I'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? So it's interesting for me to think about how this festival brought brilliant Detroit music above ground. And I apologize for rambling and kind of going all over the place too, but I mean, for me too, I love how, right now we've already kind of covered three very disparate parts of Detroit, great parts about Detroit music. We have, garage rock, indie rock, we have hip hop, we have techno. I mean, there's also an amazing soul. I mean, I don't need to tell you guys about Motown. There's a phenomenal jazz scene, and there's a huge intersection between, especially on the Motown recordings of Detroit's jazz scene and soul. This is House Shoes, who is a really great, well, I'll come back to that. At the first Electronic Music Festival, Adult, Nicola Cooperis. Adult is Nicola Cooperis and her husband, Adam Miller. Nicola is one of my favorite photographers. I highly recommend looking up her work. Her style is completely different from mine, and she's just, an amazing photographer, amazing musician, and a sweet person. Again, part of it too is being a photographer is documenting history. So this is Carl Craig and Carol Marvin, who created the first Detroit Electronic Music Festival and worked together. They had a huge falling out afterwards. But again, this is just a really great, important moment in Detroit music history. I think I'd be hard pressed to make that photo happen these days. Maybe not, I could be wrong, but Derek May at the first, a funny story about Derek May was, again, I think I told you I started shooting Detroit techno and I had no idea who anybody was. The first DJ I ever photographed was Derek May, who's one of the originators of Detroit techno. This sound system, it was at Motor Lounge. The sound system was kind of messing up and he was just, and it's a very tight sound booth. There was like a wall behind us. So he's taking records and just chucking them behind him and they're just exploding against the wall because the sound system's messed up and he's mad. And I'm just used to mosh pits. I'm like, this is great. So I just kept taking pictures. I'm like, and I think in a weird way, he was kind of like impressed that I would just roll with somebody having a temper tantrum in a sound booth. But he also had a sense of humor. He I pickpocketed me later, took my wallet and then handed it back to me. Again, it's funny. It's the first Detroit Electronic Music Festival. I mean, there's a decent crowd, but man, if you take that, last year or this Memorial Day, it's just a lot more people there. A sad part about being a music photographer too, though, is you end up documenting people we've lost. And this is Mike Huckabee, who was a great DJ and mentor to a lot of DJs in Detroit. He was also one of the first COVID deaths in Detroit before people really knew what was going on. So the other incredible music revolution is, so this is Slum Village, great Detroit hip hop act. And over here it says Slum Village Fantastic Volume 2. So this is another great Detroit music revolution. And what that is the producer Jay Dilla. Their producer was Jay Dilla, who just revolutionized hip hop production and has just been madly influential. And again, back then, I mean, heads or, hip hop aficionados were very aware of Jay Dilla, especially House Shoes. And there's a great book called Dilla Timeout that kind of talks about Jay Dilla. He passed away very young at 32 of a rare condition. So DEMF went through a lot of changes before it became Movement. At one point in time, Kevin Saunderson, who was another one of the Detroit techno originators, and Derek May were running it. That's a photo from that. But again, it's, so I looked at, just in 2000, White Stripes, Eminem, DEMF, and Jay Dilla. And again, they were just these little scenes and people just following their passions, and their shared love of hip hop or techno or garage rock, and they changed the world, And again, it's funny because I think part of the beauty, though, of Detroit back then too is not only, the great history we had, but it was just a very affordable city to live in. It made it easy for people to kind of follow their passions. And that is something I do worry about, just with, it is definitely getting more expensive to live in Detroit, but it's also a very big city too. So I think if you're willing to put in the work, there's definitely neighborhoods you can still get the deal. I feel like this is similar kind of to Detroit Electronic Music Festival, but again, another thing too was, so this is the Ghostly Records roster. So in the left-hand side there is Sam Valenti, and he famously started, this is now like a very great, not only electronic music label, but they also kind of sell art and do really cool merchandise and stuff like that. This was the label, I think like in 2004. So up front is Midwest Product, that's Matthew Deere, kind of with the sunglasses. Next to Sam, Mike Dykhouse, and then Tad Mullenix. And again, it was just this small little label that started in the dorm with Sam and Matt, and it's gone on to become just a huge label. Oops, I thought I had a picture of Sam in there. I guess I don't. Or is that it? Okay, and that's Sam these days. But again, it's just, I really had no idea kind of what the future held there. So this is John Brennan in singing Negative Approach at Third Man Records. I love how there's a shot up there that says music is sacred. This is in the permanent collection of the Detroit Institute of Arts. So for me, I feel like that's one of my greatest accomplishments is to have John Brennan in the Detroit Institute of Arts because he's one of my favorite vocalists. Again, this was just my background from, just shooting Jesus Lizard where I'm, just used to being in a mosh pit and trying to pull off a shot without getting my camera destroyed. The one thing I will say that's funny though, too, again, this is, the classic hardcore band. Again, hardcore started in the 80s. A lot of hardcore fans are getting a little older. So, after about 20 minutes of moshing, like kind of settled down. I think that's about almost 50-year-olds having them these, not all of them. But one thing I wanted to say was, so I did sadly miss, the whole hardcore scene, but this to me, again, is something that really changed the world. There was a great documentary on the Detroit hardcore scene, lamentably called Dope, Hookers, and Pavement. But it's a fantastic documentary. And not only did that documentary make me realize how the Detroit hardcore scene piggybacked on Cass Quarter counterculture and the Detroit jazz scene, but they kind of created this whole DIY, do-it-yourself aesthetic, which was very key because hardcore music was music by teenagers for teenagers, and they couldn't play in bars. But they also kind of raised a little bit of hell, and if they did play a bar, they were not welcome back most of the time. So they ended up setting up shop in the Freezer, which was a theater, a Cass Corridor theater, and that was kind of where this whole scene came about. But after I saw the documentary, it made me realize how, I could draw a line through 60s, 70s, Detroit counterculture and jazz, because after the Freezer, they moved to a place called the Clubhouse, which was next to Cobb's Corner, which was a classic Detroit jazz venue. So you have Detroit counterculture, the jazz scene is tied directly into Detroit hardcore. And this kind of creates the whole DIY aesthetic, which again is just like the bootstrapping, putting out your own records, which was a huge part of like the whole indie rock scene that I photographed. So to me, this all kind of tied together. One thing I was talking about is, obviously I love photographing my friends' bands, and there is a real joy to photographing people before they are famous and just being in a small, intimate venue. One of the obvious cool things about being a music photographer is you do get to photograph legends. So this is Iggy Pop at the Michigan Theater, 2011. It's literally the first shot I took. He just came flying out on stage. So when I'm Iggy's age, I think if Iggy was in this mosh pit, he would have lasted longer than a lot of other people. This was the Stooges reunion. Another thing I was gonna say though, that music photography has really taught me is, so that's Ron Ashton. The Stooges were still an obscure band. I mean, a relatively obscure band. I mean, they weren't making a lot of money. Ron, I remember at one point was like living in kind of a student house, like a house kind of that a bunch of students were living in by a bunch of fraternities. Like, he was not making a lot of money off his music, but he just kept at it. And I think that's one thing I've learned from photographing some legends, and I'll touch on other ones, is just the importance of persistence and just to keep pursuing your dream. I like to naively think that, pursuing your vision will pay off because, Ron is just a brilliant guitarist, but I feel like it took the world a few decades to realize that the Stooges are one of the greatest bands that ever existed. Patti Smith, again, this is Carytown Concert House in Ann Arbor. So this actually is shot in a room kind of like this, although it's more long that way. So, I mean, just being able to be in like somebody's living room to photograph Patti Smith is incredibly cool. Wayne Cramer from the MC5. Grace Jones at the Masonic Temple. Betty Lavette, who, speaking of all-time favorite vocalist, she is probably my all-time favorite living soul vocalist. She was from Detroit, like, again, just toiled in obscurity for years, and like 10 or 15 years, she's kind of had a career resurgence and done very well. But again, to me, this is the importance of seeing live music. I wasn't super aware of Betty Lavette, and I photographed her at Concert of Colors, and I just got goosebumps. I was just like, oh, she is just a phenomenal singer. So, after that, I was kind of a huge fan. These are just a couple favorite random pictures over the years. This is Invincible. They're originally Ann Arbor-based hip hop MC, but they've become real important community activist in Detroit. This is a band called Human Eye. That's Tim Vulgar. This is South by Southwest. I forget the Headhunters is the name of this bar. They're not there anymore, but they had all these like fluorescent tiki gods up on the second floor. And they were playing so loud that the tiki gods started falling down. This is also, if you guys don't know, this is Brad Hales, who runs one of the great used record stores in Ann Arbor called People's Records. It's just outside of Eastern Market. I highly recommend it. I also recommend it too, because I think, again, it's the beauty of Detroit. I can't tell you how many times I've been in People's Records, and some old Motown star just walks in, or not even star, but or a musician, and you'll be playing a record, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I played on that," or like, or that. There's a famous Eddie Kendricks record, "My People Hold On," and I remember they were playing that one time, and somebody's like, "Oh yeah, that's like my dad's chair on the cover." I think one of the other great things I feel incredibly fortunate about being a music photographer is you just strike up these friendships that, sometimes I'm still like, for me, it's weird to say like, oh yeah, Melvin Davis is my friend. So Melvin Davis is a fantastic Detroit soul singer, but he also played drums. He actually was in a band with Cramer. And again, Melvin, worked as a postman for a long time. This is also at DeMongo's, which is a really great spot in Detroit. I would recommend visiting if you've never been. Nathaniel Mayer, another great Detroit R&B vocalist who sadly passed away. I loved it too. After I took this picture, he hit me up for $10 because he said the dog needed some money. Andre Williams. Again, another great Detroit soul vocalist. This was fun too. I was photographing him in the south side of Chicago, and I thought I was going to get like 15, 20 minutes, and he like had planned the day for me. We just ran around, took me to all his favorite spots, and definitely, a few spots where, I would walk in and they're like, "What are you doing here?" And then they'd see me with Andre, like, "Oh, okay." Like, but I also bumped into Craig like later that day. You've seen that photo, right? Yeah. Dennis Coffey. Like, Dennis to me is like Dennis was a funk brother, guitarist. He is one of the great guitar revolutionaries to me. He's 80 now. He still can play fantastically. I'm not sure if it started up, no, because that's still close. He used to just play every, I think, Monday night at Northern Lights in Detroit. But he wasn't the only one, but he was one of the main kind of originators and popularizers of kind of fuzz and wah on soul songs. I mean, granted, other people were doing it and Jimi Hendrix was doing it, but it's funny, if you don't know him, you have heard his guitar playing so many times. So anyways, I mean, the fact that like Dennis is a friend, and actually called him up last month, and every time I talk to him, it's just some kind of crazy history lesson. Lyman Woodard, who's fantastic, was a fantastic keyboard player. If you don't know it, he has one album called Saturday Night Special, which is an unsung Detroit jazz classic, but played with a lot of great people, was a key person in the 70s Detroit jazz scene. John Cameron Mitchell, this is not Detroit, but he is a friend. Hedwig and the Angry Inch, it's my favorite rock and roll musical ever. I would highly recommend the movie if you haven't seen it. The trumpeter Marcus Belgrave. There's an Ann Arbor group that's actually working on a documentary about him. He used to live in Ann Arbor. There used to be a festival called Water Hill Festival where people would play outside their houses in Ann Arbor, and he would just like set up and play out there. Brendan Benson. Again, this though is funny too, because this also I think just speaks of how Detroit's changed. So he had a big old home on Grand Boulevard, very close to the Belle Isle Bridge, and he ended up moving because I think he just got frustrated with getting robbed a couple times in his home. So it's very different now, but it was a huge, massive home. And if he paid I'd be surprised if he paid $200,000 for it back then. It was like, I think this was 2005, 6. Oops, I repeated that. It has been fun too. I think one thing, since photographing the White Stripes, I've done a lot of work photographing Jack White or stuff for Third Man Records, which again, I mentioned, to me, what's cool is where they set up, it's by where Zoots is, but it's also very close to, where the Freezer was, where the Clubhouse was, where the whole Detroit hardcore scene was. So, I mean, there's a lot of history in that little neighborhood, and it's definitely gentrified. There's lots of shops there. A funny thing too, I remember when I started photographing in Detroit in 2000 was one phrase I would say that I've heard so many other people say back then too was, you could throw back then you could have thrown a bowling ball down Woodward and not hit anything. And that, was kind of true. I also remember back then, if I had time to kill between photo shoots, there was kind of one coffee shop. There was Cass Cafe, that was it. And which is sadly closing. So it has been really great to see downtown Detroit come back. That makes me really happy. I think the one big challenge is Detroit is a big city. It's 138 square miles, and there's a lot of Detroit. There's a lot of outlying neighborhoods that really need a lot of help. Being a music photographer, you get to see a lot of crazy things that you probably would, I don't think I would of my own volition. Well, actually these days I would, but I don't think I would have gone to an Insane Clown Posse concert. I was gonna say again, so there's a funny story too. I actually, before photographing them, back in my film days, I photographed them live at the Majestic for Alternative Press. And I knew, so basically, if you aren't familiar with the Insane Clown Posse, they're a hip hop act. They shower their audience with Fagos. These are 2 liters of Fago. And they have this amazing talent where they can be singing. They have this backline of 2 liters, so they'll be rapping, and they'll grab the 2 liter, they'll shake it. And in one motion, they'll turn it over, spin the top off, throw it down at about a 45-degree angle, and they just shoot off like rockets. And if for some reason, you're taunting one of them and you're in the back row, if you're 100 feet away, they'll hit you with a bottle. So anyways, in film days, I took a point and shoot film camera because I knew my camera would get destroyed by Fago. And somehow, even in my point and shoot film camera, there's a little viewfinder, which in theory is sealed. Root beer got in there. It looked also back then they were using regular Fago with sugar in it, which the whole floor was just kind of sticky. It was really impossible to clean. I photographed a band, Wolf Eyes, after that, and they're like, "You smell like root beer," and I'm like, "Yep." Well, anyways, they use sugar-free now. It's a lot easier to clean up. But also now, since my camera equipment's a lot nicer, I was shooting this from the balcony, and I thought, I'm gonna be safe. Well, the thing is, ICP fans are called juggalos. I've got some juggalo photos coming up. If you're a passionate ICP fan and want Violent J or Shaggy 2 Dope, the MCs, shoot a 2 liter at you, you then shoot it back. So I'm taking pictures, and then I thought I was fine because I would duck the 2 liters as they're coming over my head, but then they started coming from behind me, and I'm like, what the hell? So to me, juggalos are ICP fans and Insane Clown Posse fans. They're incredibly passionate. And the cry you hear when you're at an ICP show from juggalos is family, family. But what that means is everybody's welcome. All freaks are welcome. And to me, juggalos are a great example too of another important part of music photography is every music scene has its own subculture, and documenting that subculture, the fans, is a really cool thing because the subcultures are unique unto themselves, but they also change over time. I will also say though, there's a few times photographing juggalos too, I'm like, do your parents know where you're at? What's going on here? Speaking of Detroit constantly reinventing itself, I mean, there's still a number of really great, brilliant bands and sometimes too, I feel they're almost more appreciated outside of Detroit. So this is a band called Proto Martyr that are really kind of great indie band. They remind me maybe of The Fall a little bit, if anybody knows who The Fall are. I feel my one frustration a little bit, because in one way, Detroit is one of the great music scenes of the world, but I feel a lot of times Detroit musicians break outside of Detroit. So again, the White Stripes, it was NME, Britain that really broke them. With Detroit techno, again, it was the overseas crowd. Eminem, again, did not get huge in Detroit. It took Dr. Dre to do that. This is Marcus Elliott. He's a fantastic saxophone player, but also plays with Shigeto, who's an artist on Ghostly. So he plays, and he's, I think he's got a new album coming out with this duo called Balance with Michael Malice, who's a great piano player. Detroit, I have a lot more Detroit jazz pictures, but yeah, Detroit has a phenomenal jazz scene. And part of, I think, the reason for that too is one is just Detroit's amazing history of jazz musicians and also mentorship within the Detroit jazz community. But also there's Wayne State University and U of M Music School, and both of them, just from my own experience too, I've seen both those schools put out so much amazing talent. And Marcus did go to U of M Music School. Another thing though too, I feel like it's fake it till you make it. The first album cover I had photos on was Big Chief, Mac Avenue Skull Game, which was on Sub Pop. And all I was doing was ripping off Francis Wolff Blue Note photography. And again, this is ripping off that whole Blue Note photography look. I think one thing too that's incredibly gratifying doing what I do is actually seeing really talented musicians finally get the acknowledgement they deserve. So this is Rodriguez, and this is Brad Hales from People's Records. Next to him is Mayer Hawthorne. Again, if you in the 2000s were hanging out in Detroit, like Rodriguez would just walk around with a guitar on, the back, like slung around his back, and just hang out at People's Records. It was earlier than when I took this photo. I remember one day too talking to Rodriguez, and I was like, "Hey man, what are you up to?" And he's like, "Oh man, I'm just trying to write a hit, but when you're competing with Duran Duran, you're competing with 5 David Bowies." And I'm like, I don't know, I don't know if I see Duran Duran as 5 David Bowies, but again, he was just somebody you'd see around town. So it's very nice to see all the acknowledgement he got after Searching for Sugar Man. And again, records produced by Dennis Coffey. Again, sometimes too, it's just, what I love is you're just kind of photographing people, kind of as they're coming up. So these are 3 great Detroit hip hop MCs and producers, Guilty Simpson, Fat Cat, and Black Milk. Again, I was aware of Fat Cat, but I, honestly had no idea who Guilty Simpson or Black Milk was when I took this photo. The High Strung. So in the middle there, that's Josh Mallerman, the author of Bird Box. What I loved about them, again, they were very passionate back then. So they had a van and they toured libraries. They somewhat famously, when this van died, left it on the steps of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And sadly, I photographed an event there at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I feel like they should have saved the van because I feel like that is a very ubiquitous band item, but I think they did get rid of the van. So this was them playing the Blowout right before they went off to go to South by Southwest. This is Danny Brown, who's one of Detroit's most famous hip hop MCs. So again, this was before he was anybody, and this was him crashing with his uncle, who was a scrapper on the west side of town. And so then later I took his photo. This picture is funny for a few reasons, I think. One, so I took this photo for Metro Times cover story a few years after that. I think one thing I've learned too is you never tell a photo editor this is your favorite photo, because then they probably won't use it. So I love this photo. I'm like, this should be the cover. It wasn't the cover. The cover was fine. But anyways, this photo though, and Danny was nobody. So I just gave him that photo. I didn't get any money off of it, but this photo ran everywhere. And I got a lot of jobs off of it. So I do feel like, I'm sometimes not like the best businessman. I think a lot of times I'm just friends with a lot of people I photograph, and I, just give people photos. But I do feel like there are other payoffs, and I feel like this definitely paid off because this got my name in front of a lot of people, which wasn't, how I was planning or scheming things, but that's how it worked out. This is Laith Al-Sadi, who wound up being on The Voice. I mean, again, the funny thing about Laith was I, for a while, was booking bands at a small venue in Ypsilanti called Woodruff's, and he played there every Monday night. And when he wasn't, and he would just like had a gig at different spots in Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, like pretty much every day of the week. So, I mean, he just worked his ass off for years. And again, though, I mean, I love that because I feel like that's something we're losing a little bit in this day and age. I feel like when you go back and read, you know, books about Bruce Springsteen or the Rolling Stones, you know, they used to have residencies and played all the time. And, you know, he just played constantly and just worked at his craft forever. And it did finally pay off. This one I love too. So this is Greta Van Fleet. You know, I kind of became aware that they were slowly blowing up. And I was just, you know, amazed too, because I was noticing how they like sold out St. Andrews and then the Fillmore and the Fox. I also kind of perversely love it because I feel like I love anything that produces a strong reaction musically in people. Wolf Eyes is his band I photographed. They're kind of noise musicians that piss off people a lot too. Greta Van Fleet like really pisses people off. It kind of amazes me, as if nobody has ripped off Led Zeppelin before, as if Led Zeppelin didn't rip off a number of musicians. And the one thing I guess that's interesting for me is one, I do think Josh is a phenomenal vocalist. Again, as just someone who photographs a lot of music, like I don't often just see someone just sing their ass off and like the whole crowd just kind of loses it. It's not, I do think they're a talented band. And so I did end up setting up because I kind of had a feeling something might be happening with them. So I did set up a shoot kind of before they blew up. And again, this is me completely ripping off one of my favorite photographers, Mick Rock. I think you can all picture the Queen photograph I ripped off for that. But again, for me, it was fun because, you know, the writer, Geraldine, who's a great writer who wrote it, you know, didn't know a lot about him, and you know, I kind of set him up. But for me, it was fun because I mean, I can just tell they're a bunch of music nerds. When they came in, like I could tell that not only were they music nerds, but they had probably watched every Beatles press conference ever. I mean, they were just like cracking jokes and just doing all this screwball stuff. And after we were done, I'm like, just look up some Beatles press conferences when you're done. So anyways, I do like Greta Van Fleet. I know that I like lose huge credibility with a bunch of people for that. It's fine. But again, it just amazes me that they just really piss people off. I think we're into the funny stories part of the photos. This is Kareem Riggins, who on one hand is Diana Krall's drummer, but is also kind of was very close with Jay Dilla and kind of part of that whole Detroit hip hop production revolution. This was funny because he's like, oh yeah, let's meet at the Townsend Hotel in Birmingham and take some photos. I'm like, oh yeah, sounds good. So I go over there and I thought he had cleared it with the Townsend Hotel. He hadn't, so we got chased out. You know, so one thing about being a photographer is you just kind of have to make do or like go with a plan B really quick. So this was actually shot in the parking structure in downtown Birmingham. This is Wolf Eyes, speaking of music producing strong reactions in people. So Wolf Eyes is kind of a noise band, but they also have aspects of jazz in them. Their performances are very extreme and very cathartic. With my background photographing the Jesus Lizard, this was something I loved. Talking about times changing, you know, I feel like we live in the Instagram age, you know, and especially kids are used to having their photos taken. I take lots of photos for nonprofits, and I can't tell you how many times when I'm like at a school and like I'm taking the camera out and like students are like, hey man, yeah. And, you know, I kind of let it get out of their system, but it's like, that's not what my clients want, but like, let's have some fun. Well, anyways, back then, the Sub Pop wanted a press photo. They were so freaked out, or just felt like it was a sellout to have a press photo. And I was just like, I've done this so many times, like, what's the big deal? So we ended up not using this. We ended up sending live shots that I'd taken of them at Movement because they felt a press photo was selling out. So I would be amazed if anybody kind of has that discussion in this day and age. This is the Detroit Cobras. I was gonna say one thing too that I love as a photographer is a lot of times it's just me being there with the camera. Like it's not my ideas at all. I think it's just me being receptive to other people. So this is Rachel and Mary from the Detroit Cobras. They're like two mischievous sisters, like one of my favorite bands to ever photograph. I think they'd done a shoot for an album and it hadn't worked out. So they just called me up last minute, and our friend Greg Bays was working at the Magic Stick and set us up with a shot, or let us go in to do a shoot, and they just started being goofballs, and I just started taking, this was not, yeah, I mean, how would I even ask somebody to do that? It's like, okay, Rachel, like, can you get on the floor and kind of roll around? But then, okay, yeah, Mary, grab her boot and play the guitar with it. Like, I mean, they're just goofballs, and I love them. One thing, so a lot of times too, friends know me well enough. If they just throw an idea out, they know I'll be there. So I love this because this is a cliche you're never supposed to do in photography. Band on the railroad tracks. Never do that. It's done. So, but Mary was like, I want to try Rachel up to the train tracks. I'm like, yeah, let's do that. So there's other shots where you can see it better, but this is by Lincoln Street Art Project, which is a cool place. And it's also a number of bands practice. I've done so many band shoots here over the years. The Fisher Building's kind of off in the distance. So I did have the intelligence, because there's another track here. I was like, there was a homeless gentleman there, and I'm like, which line does Amtrak use? And it's like, oh, it's that one. I'm like, so, okay, we'll tie you down on this track. Well, sure enough, the Amtrak train came by, and I can't tell you like how many, because you're going slow, you're close to the train station, but I can't tell you how many people were like, I knew Detroit was fucked up, but really? Like, what the hell? Like, so yes, and again, this is not this is them. This is all, and sadly, we did, Rachel passed away early this year. If any of you are in Detroit, there's gonna be a memorial concert the 28th, the Magic Stick. So this is Dumini DePores, who's one of my favorite guitarists in Detroit. He's kind of a cross between Eddie Hazel and Jimi Hendrix. And Dumini called me up one day and he's like, can I take pictures of me by a spaceship? And I'm like, yeah, I want to take pictures of you by a spaceship. So this was the 1 Mile project on Oakland Avenue in the north end of Detroit, which actually is the neighborhood Betty Lavette grew up in, which then led to like one of my all-time favorite pictures. I mean, there was just this crazy light coming in through a door, and that just, and I mean, again, this is me just showing up with a camera. That's not my concept. This is Todd Osborne, who is a ghostly recording artist. He's not only like a great DJ and producer, but he's also one of these guys who's so brilliant and mysterious. The more you know about him, like the more mysterious he is. When I was working at Woodruff's, he was kind of our fix-it man. But you know, he'd also, so one day he'd be like fixing the sign at our venue, and then he'd be go playing with Aphex Twin in Rome, who's one of like the preeminent techno musicians. So I had a column called Motor City Rides, Motor City Cribs at Metro Times for a while, which was either people with their cars or where artists with their cars or where they lived. So Todd called me up. He's like, yeah, I've got this old, you know, Lincoln Town car, and my friend's gonna fly his airplane in, and my friend's gonna like hide behind here and hold up a satellite dish, you know, there's not a satellite dish. And this is like an Armani suit. I mean, to me, this is just completely ridiculous. And it's just because that's Todd and I just showed up. And yeah, it's Manchester Airport. His buddy flew the airplane in. Fred Thomas, to me, who's a very unsung Ann Arbor musician, producer. So many great musicians from the area have played in his bands, or he's played in their bands, or he's produced their records. But anyways, Fred one day was like, I want to do, and this is his band called Saturday Looks Good to Me. He's like, yeah, I want to do a picture of me vomiting flowers. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I also recently, as an aside, had an art show in Ann Arbor, and I blew this up the size of an entire wall, and I love them for letting me do that. Funny story is, so I have photographed Insane Clown Posse a number of times. During Metro Times Blowout, which is a very crazy busy time because I have to photograph a lot of bands before the festival happens, for stories, to preview the festival, and then during the festival I shoot a lot. So Spin emailed me and like, we want to do this thing called In My Room with Violent J. So I was thinking like, this is like my Motor City Cribs, cool. You want me to photograph Violent J? And then 5 emails in, it's like, no, I'm interviewing Violent J and you're flying a photographer out from New York. Okay, so So I did interview Violent J, and one, it was really fun. I mean, in a way, he's almost mystified by his fans as much as anybody else is. It was the first interview I had to transcribe, which was very hard because on one hand, in the moment, he was incredibly articulate and interesting, but he said a lot in between everything. So it was very frustrating. This is a legendary Detroit garage rock band called the Gories. Again, talking about things not going as planned. So kind of at last minute, there was going to be a Metro Times cover story. So I drove down to Memphis. They're playing in Memphis. I just need a half hour for a cover shot, not much. Peg, the drummer, was just nowhere to be found. So 10 minutes before they went on stage, let's do some cover photos. So it's funny, I had all these like great ideas of what we're gonna do in Memphis. And I was like, yeah, I got 10 minutes, let's make this work. So this is Danny Croha on the right, and this is Mick Collins on the left, who's also in a great band called the Dirt Bombs. Danny, after the Gories, is in the Demolition Del Rods. The band is still current with a different drummer. What I loved about this, and this is my favorite shot from it, but it's not in. So they wanted to do a shot where you could see the Hastings Street sign. So this is the only street corner that has Hastings. You'll just have to trust me above it. This is actually by a really cool venue called Hastings Street Ballroom. But Hastings Street was Black Bottom. It was the neighborhood, the Black neighborhood, where there were a bunch of great venues. Marcia Music, who's a great Detroit music historian, her dad had a record shop there that did the first recordings of Aretha Franklin, recorded Aretha Franklin's father. John Lee Hooker did a bunch of recordings. Well, anyways, Hastings Street was torn down to be turned into 375. And now it's coming full circle because I think 375 is going to go away. This is Andrew WK. This is at the Magic Stick. This was one of the craziest. It's funny too, there have been a few times as a photographer where things like are really dangerous, but it also feels awesome. Like, so like when I got the scars shooting Eminem, like part of it, I was like, holy like what the hell did I just do to myself? But part of me was like, that was really cool. So this was the Bulb Records 10th anniversary festival. And again, talking about people just being passionate record nerds. So Bulb Records was run by Pete Larson, who put out the first Wolf Eyes record and Andrew WK record. Anyways, and Andrew, if you don't know him, is this amazingly positive, inspiring person. And before the show, he's like, get up on stage, do whatever you need to do. So during the show, the Magic Stick's on the second floor, there's a bowling alley underneath it. The whole floor is just doing this, just because everybody's freaking out. And I think you can probably believe me looking at that photo. At the end of the show, there was a drop ceiling beneath the bowling alley that got knocked onto the bowling alley. And I remembered asking my friend Greg Bays, who was booking there, I'm like, are you guys freaked out? And he's like, nah, we got insurance. We're cool. I couldn't pull it up before this, but this is Big Sean at the Palace. What's the reason I wanted to bring this up? So this was funny. I photographed him for Billboard, and this was 2013. What Billboard really wanted was Kanye West was there. And they wanted me to send a photo on my iPhone to Kanye West to tweet. I was like, that's cool. So back in 2013, once you open the Palace to a bunch of teenagers, you can't send a picture to save your life. So at the end of the show, I'm backstage and the editor's like, I really need a picture of Kanye. So Kanye, at that point in time, was 3 feet away eating some fried chicken. I took a picture of Kanye eating fried chicken, at which point he just froze. He's like, you need to delete that right now. And the second he said it, like, dude, I am really sorry. But I also had pictures of him having recently assaulted paparazzi at LAX. So anyways, I think part of that too, though, is I'm not a very good liar. So I probably just should have told the editor, like, oh, he's not here yet. Give me a couple minutes. But Bill Frisell, one of my favorite jazz guitarists. What's funny about this, and where I'm going to kind of tie it into some changes in tech. So there's also been an evolution in digital cameras from DSLRs, which are based on film models where, a film camera, the mirror had to come up so the light could pass through and hit the film. And that's how DSLRs are modeled. So it limits how fast you can shoot because DSLR is the mirror. And if any of you are thinking of buying cameras, DSLRs are dying. Canon and Nikon have lost interest in manufacturing them. So one, DSLRs, you're limited to like 5 or 6 frames per second, but they also make noise. So I have a lot of hearing loss from photographing loud shows, but this show was so quiet and hushed, Lydia Mendelsohn Theater, I could hear people breathing. So I took 16 photos in 6 minutes. I remember timing it, and I was waiting till the music kind of swelled. But after, and then I was supposed to shoot 2 songs, so I kind of cut to the other side. And the second I did it, and Bill was pretty mild mannered, and he's like, can you please stop? And on one hand, I just felt horrified because he's one of my favorite guitarists, but I was actually grateful too. It's like, if I'm distracting you, like, please tell me. I probably would have taken off. It's a little uncomfortable, but I was just being a nice guy photographing this for University Musical Society. So I also agreed to stay after and photograph the Q&A and photograph a sound woman for some sound magazine. During the Q&A, he's like, I felt really bad. I felt like I was being an a-hole like Keith Jarrett. I bet that photographer like ran off with his tail between his legs. I'm like, nope, still here. He apologized after, and I was like, no, you don't need to apologize. He invited me the next day. I couldn't go. But the whole point of the story is now, I shoot mirrorless, and I've been shooting for a couple of years now. And there's a lot that I do love about shooting mirrorless. So this is a band called Bitchin' Bajas, which is kind of a terrible band name, but I love them. And again, this ties into the whole, like, just going out and seeing live music is so great. I didn't really, and it's funny because I realized I'd seen them warm up for Stereo Lab, but I hadn't really, it's kind of hard to hear them at that. Anyways, I really love them, but this is kind of beautiful, quiet electronic music. But now I have a Nikon Z9 that makes no noise. And it's weird when I'm doing shoots with people that aren't concerts where I'll be like, oh yeah, that looks great. And they're like, well, why don't you take a picture? I'm like, no, I did. Like, so it's great because now I'm not limited by my shutter making noise. There's also, it can shoot up to 120 frames a second, which I use very sparingly because when you get home and have 2,000 pictures, that's not a lot of fun to go through. I was also going to say too, just with the evolution. So yes, if you're thinking of buying a camera, go mirrorless. That's where it's going. There's also just been an evolution in lighting. Back when I started out, just kind of having lighting was a very expensive thing. You usually needed a studio. It wasn't very portable. Stuff is so portable now. I mean, this is a band I love called Mini Horse. On the right is Ben Collins, who's just a brilliant songwriter, producer, like programmer. I mean, he's just a freak. And this is John and Christian, who we're in a band called Starling Electric. I really love. But again, this is just a thing called a pixel stick. So I mean, again, this was just all stuff I carried. I mean, I think like, 20 years ago, I would have needed a bunch of assistance, but this was just, this was just all stuff I carried with me. So I used, just a flash, and this is a thing called a pixel stick with a time exposure. Again, this is my friend Tad Mullenix. And again, it's just so easy to just, this is in like a small bedroom in his house. It's just, things are a lot easier. I mentioned how I went to study at Washtenaw Community College, and now I've been teaching there for 2 semesters. So for me, I think it's a really exciting time. If any of you want to take up photography, to take it up, because I think not only is like, there's really great portable, affordable lighting solutions, but digital cameras have really evolved. They are great. I think like 2016, I got a Nikon D850, and since 2016, I've been happy with digital cameras. I think between 2002, 2016, it was like a love, hate with, and sometimes more hate with digital cameras. Funny story. So this is Mayer Hawthorne, who, yes, who before Mayer Hawthorne was Mayer Hawthorne, he was DJ Haircut in Athletic Mike League. So Drew was just had an encyclopedic knowledge of music, like most hip hop producers, and he couldn't afford to sample records, so he kind of just made these kind of neo soul spoof songs, and ended up getting a record deal off of it. He's also become quite a fashion plate. What I love about this is it's a thrift store suit and his dad's shoes. But prior to this time, I used to be able to go to Hitsville, USA and just be like, I'm with the Metro Times, I'd like to do a shoot. And I'd go, okay. So this was the first time I got shut down, which is fair. But yeah, we ended up having to shoot stuff outside. I love that. I feel like, so this is, this is a photo of mine that has become a meme. So I feel like that's a true accomplishment in this day and age. So this is John Olson from Wolf Eyes. He on Instagram is Insane with a Z, Johnny, who posts a lot of really goofy memes that a lot of times deal with music or Steely Dan. Well, I feel like his Steely Dan phase has gone over a little bit, but he just posts a lot of really ridiculous memes. And yeah, this has become a huge meme. But I love it too, because again, this is just some handmade horn, like the PVC pipe. And again, for me, music and small, this is a place called Arbor Vitae, which is just like a loft in Ann Arbor above a record store I used to work at Wazoo. So this is Josh Mallerman. This was me taking author photos for him for Bird Box, which again, we had no idea it was going to become a huge thing. But what I love about this is we did a whole shoot that I did with a real camera, but then his author photo was an iPhone photo. That's the one he liked. All right, I think that is it. Any questions? Yep.
Let's keep that Zoom going in case there's some questions. And I'll ask one a little bit because I always have questions. So when you were talking about shooting, you photograph people that you know well and then people you don't know at all. Does that feel like a different experience? Like how did you approach it differently?
Well, no, I mean, I don't think I do approach it differently, because I think the thing that I wasn't expecting going into this was, I think, part of me, my motivation to be a photographer was I just wanted to and that is a very cool part of it. But for me, like the best part about what I do is like all the people that get to meet. I never would have guessed that, but that's what I love about what I do. So I think pretty much everybody I photograph are just people I'm really interested in. Again, it was funny because, I was an indie rock kid. So, when I started photographing a lot of Detroit hip hop, I wasn't sure if we would have a lot of common ground. But again, me working at a record store, I'm a record nerd. Hip hop producers are all record nerds. Like, you just start talking about records and it's like, so not only do I feel fortunate that I get to meet new people, but I'm also fortunate too that, I think other people that I really need to give a shout out and thanks to is just all the great editors I work with. Because I get to work on like really cool story. I'm really glad I've never worked with a bad editor. I would probably be horrible, but no, I just get to meet really amazing people. So I think I'm just genuinely interested. And I think my problem on most shoots is I will talk to you for a half hour. I go over, as I think you probably noticed. So no, I don't. And yeah, I'm usually, it's funny too, because I think there's a few times where, I'm reluctant to have my photo taken. So I think when I get that from other people too, like I totally understand it too. So. And I think the funny thing too is, I've since evolved into a lot of other different photography. I thought like going from being, a music photographer to, because I shoot for this publication called Concentrate. So a lot of times, at least in the beginning, it was like startups and CEOs. And I'm like, they're just gonna think I'm like a music photographer. But then, I realized basically, like shooting musicians, was actually like me shooting musicians was cool actually with them, which was awesome. But I think just dealing with musicians set me up well for it, because I feel like, most musicians are really cool, interesting people. A few are really rough and just won't give you time. And like, I'm also used to that too. It's like, okay, give me 5 minutes, we'll be out of here. So yeah.
Questions? Nothing on? Nope. All right, good. Well, thanks so much.
Tom out there?
He was there.
Yeah, he's still
there.
All right. Hi, Tom. There's a couple random I have prints of, over here, Patti Smith and Wayne Cramer. Thanks for coming.
Cool. Thanks so much.